On the West Coast and 3 o'clock at the White House, where the press secretary has just taken questions from reporters, including about the Stormy Daniels scandal. A lawyer for the former adult actress now says she received a physical threat and a warning to stay quiet. Plus, Russia vowing to retaliate after Washington penalizes Moscow for election meddling. Also, what caused the bridge collapse in Miami? Coming up, what we know about the moments before it came down.
I just saw it go down and I saw smoke, and like I said, I said to myself, why did they just do that?
Now investigators say more victims could be buried under tons of concrete and steel. Let's get to it.
Breaking news. Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And first from the Fox News deck this Friday afternoon, the president and the porn star. New today, the lawyer for the adult film actress Stormy Daniels says she was warned to stay silent on what she knows about President Trump and threatened with physical harm if she does not. Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, is suing President Trump and his personal lawyer. Her attorney said this morning it's an attempt to throw out a non-disclosure agreement that she signed so she can speak freely about her alleged relationship with the man who would become president. Clifford alleges that she began an intimate relationship with Mr. Trump in 2006 and that it continued well into the year 2007. And that's a quote. The White House has reportedly and repeatedly denied that there was any relationship. It's Fox Top Story, and Rich Edson's on it live for us at the White House. Rich?
Shep, and this is as legal action will continue here as Stormy Daniels and her attorney are suing the President of the United States, claiming that the terms of their non-disclosure agreement are no longer valid. This is after claims earlier today on a couple of cable news shows, CNN, MSNBC. Stormy Daniels' attorney is alleging that she received threats telling her to essentially keep quiet about her claims about the president, though that attorney didn't provide any further details about those situations. It's something that has been a topic a number of times here at the White House during the White House briefing, and it's something that Sarah Huckabee Sanders again addressed today.
Obviously, we take the safety and security of any person seriously. Certainly would condemn anyone threatening any individual, but I have no knowledge of that situation and would refer you to the president's outside personal attorneys.
Does the president have anything to say about it?
I haven't spoken with him about that specifically.
Daniels and her attorney say that she's going to discuss this in an interview later this month, Shep.
Hey, Rich, the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, for viewers who are with us, has just said that there are no staff changes coming. Is she talking about that at this moment or in the near future, or what do we know for details?
What we know is right now there are no plans, according to the White House, according to what Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say. This is fueled in part by the president himself, who had said earlier this week that he was still trying to perfect his cabinet, and that perhaps suggested that they weren't done with staff changes. This is a week in which the Treasury Secretary, or the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, was fired on Tuesday. That's how the week started, and then followed by other speculation, H.R. McMaster, the VA Secretary, and that's something that Sarah Huckabee Sanders also addressed this afternoon.
The Chief of Staff actually spoke to a number of staff this morning, reassuring them that there were personnel changes, no immediate personnel changes at this time, and that people shouldn't be concerned. We should do exactly what we do every day, and that's come to work and do the very best job that we can, and that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're focused on, and many of us have relayed that to other staffers that weren't part of that meeting, and we're going to continue to focus on having record success in this second year as we had in our first year.
There are major vacancies throughout the Trump administration. Earlier in the briefing, Mark Short, the legislative director, used this briefing as an opportunity to essentially lambaste Senate Democrats to say it's their fault. They're the ones who are holding up nominees. They say that procedural votes forced in the Senate totaled 4 for George W. Bush. Barack Obama, the president, got 17 in his first term, and that President Trump faces 79. But Democrats would respond, first off, that that's essentially what Republicans did to Barack Obama, stonewalling different appointments, and that also the Trump administration has failed to nominate some key positions, like an ambassador to South Korea. And on top of all that, already here we are in just the second year, and there are other positions that are getting another nomination. Rex Tillerson in year 1, Mike Pompeo year 2 at state. Shep.
Hey, Rich, Moscow is now threatening to hit back at Washington. A top Russian diplomat says that the Kremlin plans to blacklist more Americans. That's after the Trump administration handed out new punishments against Russians for meddling in the 2016 presidential election. They include the 13 Russians indicted by a grand jury just last month as part of the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Back to Rich at the White House. Anything from the president?
Nothing directly from the president on this or the White House, other than there's a lot of retaliation now happening between Moscow, the United Kingdom, the United States. Moscow retaliating against the British, against the United States for the sanctions that the U.S. had yesterday. The UK kicking diplomats out. And now Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, saying earlier today that Russia will certainly expel British diplomats after the UK expelled their diplomats. So this is ongoing as the sanctions list that Russia now has been expanded against the United States. The administration says that there has been, or the administration has faced questions, especially from critics who have said that they've not gone far enough when it comes to sanctioning Russia, in particular what the administration announced yesterday. The State Department says that's not the case, and they're potentially exploring more sanctions against Russia.
Let me remind you that sanctions are ongoing. Just because sanctions are put in place on one day, March 15th, does not mean that additional sanctions won't be put in place in the coming days and in the coming weeks and in the coming months. These tend to happen in batches, and we've seen this before, and we'll continue to look at this.
And this is after administration officials revealed that Russian government hackers had penetrated critical U.S. infrastructure just to look around, get some information there. So plenty to go on between these governments, Shep.
Rich, that's a very busy day at the White House. Thank you, sir. Let's get to Chris Wallace, who's live with us in Washington. The politics of all this, Chris, what's your read?
You talk about in terms of Russia specifically?
Yes.
Well, you know, it's interesting. The president taking kind of a middle road because these were the first sanctions announced yesterday. These were the first sanctions that have been ever imposed by the Trump administration against Russia for meddling in the 2016 election. When you think how long those charges have been going on, that's fairly remarkable. In addition to which, the Congress, by overwhelming majorities in both the House and the Senate, passed sanctions that they said the president could then impose last July, and it wasn't until yesterday, March 15th, that the president did impose them, and he didn't impose the full arsenal of sanctions that they have authorized. There are still sanctions they could impose on the defense and other industries. The president so far has not taken those steps.
On the Stormy Daniels matter, it's not even something that's very comfortable to talk about, if I must confess, but the fact is an attorney for her has made a very serious accusation, did so this morning, and I wonder about the politics of that in your estimation.
Well, I don't know. You know, the point is that in previous administrations and with previous presidents, the allegation of a relationship with a porn star would be sky-high news, just enormous news. But with this president, in this administration, it doesn't seem to be. And I also have to say that for somebody who supposedly had a non-disclosure agreement, is there anything about the relationship between Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump that you haven't already heard? Because I don't know about you, but I find it all kind of boring.
Well, it's not very interesting, but the accusation of a threat of physical harm, that part of this is a very serious accusation. If something like that were to be true, that could be a legal matter, could it not?
Yeah, I suppose it could. On the other hand, you just kind of have to say we've heard so much about the non-disclosure and then the suing of the lawyers and the money and whose name was on the paper, on the contract and not. And at this late date, we're hearing about a threat of physical force. It just seems, you know, we see in these cases oftentimes lawyers just making allegations against other lawyers. We ought to move on.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, on the matter of Russia, the White House has come out and condemned the Russians. We are on board with Europeans on a joint statement against the Russians. There are sanctions coming. There are people being dismissed from Great Britain. Are we expecting to hear anything from the president specifically on this, or are the president's people going to handle it?
Well, that's a good question, because so far the president did yesterday in the Oval Office say tough is the rhetoric that we've heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, his spokeswoman, that we've heard from the UN ambassador Nikki Haley. And it is interesting that the president, who certainly isn't shy about tough rhetoric when he wants to use it, has not been nearly as tough as some of his officials have been when it comes to taking on Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin.
Theresa May had strong words.
Well, yeah, of course, somebody was killed in her country with a nerve agent, the first offensive use of a nerve agent in Europe since World War II. I mean, it's a pretty shocking case. But it is interesting. And the statement that the president made, a written statement, along with the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany, was pretty tough. They talked about exactly that this is unprecedented and abhorring this attack. But on the other hand, when it comes from the president's own lips, we have not heard very much.
It's been interesting to follow the back and forth regarding staffing at the White House, Chris, something that, again, is kind of boring from time to time. But in this case, there's been so much discussion about H.R. McMaster and then some of the ones who've already gone, and now the White House coming forward to say we're expecting those staffing changes. And I wonder if they're saying we mean not today, but is it something different at 5 o'clock this afternoon? I just don't have a way of knowing. I wonder if you have any insight.
Well, yeah, I do have a little bit of insight. I did some reporting yesterday with this top advisor to the president who said some of this may happen, but this talk about a bloodbath and huge staff changes in the immediate future is not going to happen. And that seems to be the prevailing word that's coming out today. There's also a very interesting development you may not have had a chance to see since it broke just when you went on the air. The Axios news site, their crackerjack White House reporter Jonathan Swan says that the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly had an off-the-record session with some reporters. Now, Swan wasn't invited to the session, so he wasn't bound by the off-the-record ground rules, but he heard from somebody who obviously leaked it to him, one of his colleagues, that the Chief of Staff was saying all the speculation that the president may be behind it because he likes to kind of spitball. He likes to, talk about, gee, I'm not happy with this person, talks to various friends, in that executive time when he's not at the Oval Office, and says, well, what would you think of so-and-so for Secretary of State or so-and-so for National Security Advisor? And he said, I think some of those friends have been feeding this conversation. And then also in this off-the-record session, which is now on the record, the Chief of Staff supposedly said there's not going to be any change when it comes to General McMaster and the national security position for some time.
Well, it's interesting because, Chris, it was the president himself who said from the microphones, I believe, day before yesterday, I almost have my cabinet to where I want it, suggesting that, in fact, he did have more changes that he wanted to make. So I had just heard it from him and assumed that it was something that was coming.
Yeah, well, I think it probably is, but the word today, and again, as you say, what is it? It's now, 3:12?
Exactly.
As of this moment, there's not going to be any change with McMaster. And also, Kelly went to some length to defend Ben Carson, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, who supposedly got in trouble for that $31,000 dining room set, which I think, incidentally, would look lovely in your dining room, Shep.
I don't have a dining room.
Well, in any case, he defended him as well. So I don't know. We may not get a 5 o'clock surprise today.
Well, maybe it'd make for a better day. Are you watching basketball? Did you see what Buffalo did to Arizona?
I didn't see it. I read about it, though, yes.
Yeah, March Madness, so much fun. I don't really have a horse in that game, but man alive, Buffalo looked serious.
With Ole Miss, you certainly don't have a horse in that game.
No, I know, Chris. I don't know. Things are changing. I can't control everything, Chris, I'm very proud of them, though. They're going to have a great year next year.
You sound like the Brooklyn Dodgers. Wait till next year.
Well, that's what we're doing right now. And the baseball team, 16-1 and lighting the place on fire. It's amazing, Chris.
Ole Miss baseball.
Yep.
I never thought I'd hear you talk about that.
Well, I'm a religious follower of that team. They're fantastic. You should come down to Swayze Field and be a Swayze crazy sometime, Chris. You'd love it there.
Well, no. If I come with you to an Ole Miss sporting event, it's going to be to the Swamp for a football game.
Oh, to the Swamp. Wow. Enemy territory.
Chris, no. What do you mean? Not the Swamp. What do you call that thing?
The Grove.
The Grove. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
hush my mouth.
We don't. Careful now. Fox News Sunday is this Sunday with Chris Wallace. He'll talk with the House Oversight Committee Chairman, the South Carolina Republican Trey Gowdy. Also, the number 2 Senate Democrat, the Minority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois. That's this Sunday on Fox News Sunday. I didn't miss your reference there, Wallace. You be nice now. No shooting inside the tent. Everything's wonderful. Going to take a 1-week vacation as previously planned and be back in a week, and everything's going to be peachy keen and hunky-dory. I can't wait.
That's what they always say. Previously planned 1-week vacation.
Well, I have the airline tickets. It's been booked for a while. Have a fantastic weekend, my friend.
You too, my friend.
Tell everyone down there hello for me, all right? All right. I think they cut his mic off. Sometimes enough's enough. Hey, the special counsel may be crossing what President Trump once called a red line. Robert Mueller reportedly demanding documents from the Trump Organization, and not just about Russia. We'll get into all that coming up. More now on the Russia investigation and a report by the New York Times that the special counsel Robert Mueller's team has subpoenaed the Trump Organization, demanding documents related to Russia and otherwise. Bob Bianchi is here. He's a defense attorney, former federal prosecutor, dealt with many cases involving the FBI and federal prosecutors. It was for the president who once said that would be a red line in his estimation, but what Robert Mueller does, I guess, is up to him.
Yeah, and it's going to be harder and harder for President Trump to argue against this when the FBI is coming up with regard to issues that have led to sanctions. They're coming up with indictments. There's productivity and fruit coming from the Mueller investigation. So what are you going to do now when he says, I need these documents? And, you know, sometimes, Shep, as prosecutors, sometimes we get them so that we can pass the straight face test when we say somebody's innocent of something. But I think that they're really looking into some nefarious connections here between someone in the Trump Organization and all of these data points going on with Russia.
When you look at the big picture here, is there something you can point to as a suggestion for why it is that Mueller might want these documents at this time?
I think that they actually waited longer than they typically do, and I think that's a strategic and tactical reason. As a head prosecutor...
How do you mean?
Yeah, as a head prosecutor myself, when I was appointed, I didn't have any interference with the political system in anything that it was that I did. But if I were to feel that my job was at jeopardy, which it couldn't be because I was a constitutionally protected officer, but Mueller is not, then I would be going to the Trump Organization second, doing the obstruction case first, because then I don't have to telegraph that I'm looking into your organization, looking for the finances. I think it was a brilliant move to wait to do that so that he could protect himself, insulate himself and his people from being fired or having Rosenstein or somebody else fire him down the road.
Is there a recourse legally through the system for the president to deny Robert Mueller those documents, or the president's team?
This is virtually black letter law. It's an organization that has no Fifth Amendment right not to produce these records. These records will be produced, there's no question about it. And Shep, one thing that I find really interesting going on here with the timing, with the Stormy Daniels thing, and I know that I may be a little bit of a lone voice with this, but who knows what's in those organizational emails? You saw that the lawyer was using Trump Organization emails to conduct private business that was outside.
If true, that is quite surprising.
If true, what else is out there? And this may be the reason Mueller and his people want to know. I'm not saying it's true, but they may want to know, wow, is there other compromise here? Is there other information, other payoffs? Is there something that's happening where the president, with his soft position on Russia, is that way for a reason? And that's what they're going to be looking into.
A lawyer understands the ramifications of what he or she is saying at any given moment, or should, at least through the legal system. And when the lawyer said this morning over on Morning Joe, if the lawyer said to Mika Brzezinski that there was physical harm that was threatened, what, legally speaking and legally only, if you threaten physical harm against someone for speaking out while you have a non-disclosure agreement, how would you consider that to be?
Well, that would be a state law crime. There's no question about it. It may vitiate or eliminate the NDA in some way, shape, or form. We don't know whether or not that threat happened prior, during the execution.
And we don't even know if it happened. We just know the lawyer says it happened.
And we know a lawyer said that it happened.
But if the lawyer said something like that happened and it didn't, that would be an enormous violation.
This lawyer strikes me as being very precise with his words and very, very confident in that aspect of what he said.
Well, it's a disturbing thing to hear. You know, a threat of physical harm is, you know, if true, I guess the legal system will deal with it.
Well, I have a question, Shep. If Russia can go into the DNC emails, can go into the Podesta emails, if it can go into our nuclear grids, is it possible that they knew about this too?
It's a good question. We'll be right back. Police in Miami say they expect to find more people who did not survive buried beneath the wreckage of the pedestrian bridge. Minutes ago, cameras caught the moment when crews intentionally brought down another section of that bridge. Take a look here. The right side of your screen, you can see it give way, and then there he goes. Our reporters on the scene say this was planned in advance so that teams try to stabilize the scene. And all of this a day after the pedestrian bridge fell, killing at least 6 people and injuring 10 others. We have surveillance video. Watch this. That's the moment that it fell. That was yesterday afternoon, somewhere around 2 o'clock or so. You can see it on the top left-hand corner there. Crews had started installing the bridge at Florida International University just days ago, on Saturday, in fact. Crews conducted a stress test, and then the bridge fell. A police sergeant tells Fox News she initially thought that the crews brought down the bridge on purpose. And when she realized it was an accident, she ran to try to help.
I actually started to crawl underneath the bridge, and I got yelled at by fire rescue, like, what are you doing? There's nothing you can do. It was a terrible thing to see, knowing that there's people in there that you just cannot get to.
It's a helpless feeling. Search crews have been using listening devices and dogs, for that matter, to try to find survivors. But so far, they say they haven't found anybody alive. And they say the structure is extremely unstable, which makes rescue and recovery efforts very dangerous. Phil Keating with the news. He's live on scene for us again today in West Miami-Dade. Phil, explain the main focus right now.
Right now, first and foremost, Shep, it's dignity, decency, and class, specifically for the families of those 6 victims whose bodies remain crushed underneath the bridge behind me. They were just driving or working on the bridge on a gorgeous blue sky day like today when suddenly 1 million pounds of concrete suddenly gave way, crashing down onto 8 busy lanes of traffic. And because there remains so much bridge weight on those 8 cars that they know of, the bodies have yet to be recovered and positively ID'd. So those families right now can only assume their loved one is in there. A local crane operator has offered to help lift the heavy slabs of rubble, but this is going to take a very long time. An investigative GO team with the National Transportation Safety Board arrived last night. Just about the same time, this all changed from a search and rescue operation to a recovery one. They'll be probing everything on the design, construction, and engineering, and if anyone was negligent, they will face consequences. But for Miami-Dade police, their focus is a homicide investigation with 6 victims.
Our priority, which is the most critical thing, is to get to the victims, get to the remains of the people that are underneath that bridge so that we can take them to a proper place so that their families can have the appropriate burial and ceremonies that they want to have.
And recall, this concrete pedestrian bridge set to open this upcoming December had the concrete walkway and then above it a concrete slab that would protect the pedestrians, the students, going to campus and back home across the street from the sun and rain. Well, they pancaked when the bridge collapsed, and so there is so much weight there. Investigators believe there are just 8 vehicles still trapped and crushed underneath the rubble, but they're holding out the possibility that there could be more. So, unfortunately, Shep, the death toll here actually could still rise.
It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the victims is an FIU student.
Yeah, that has now been confirmed by the Miami Herald here in town. They just concluded an interview with Orlando Duran, and he confirmed to the newspaper, as we reported last night, that an FIU student was among the dead. Her name, Alexa Duran, 18 years old. She grew up here in Miami. She was a freshman at Florida International University, and her father says she was basically driving her gray Toyota SUV. The bridge collapsed on top of it, including her, and she could not get out. Heartbreaking.
Yeah, no doubt. Phil Keating on scene west of downtown Miami in western Miami-Dade. Vladimir Putin's people are targeting Great Britain in a blow-up over the poisoning of a former spy there. The UK booted some Russian diplomats and called out President Putin personally for ordering the spy's death. And now the Kremlin is hitting back. Plus, accusations that Russia's been hacking American infrastructure, including our power plants. Plus, 2 deadly U.S. military crashes in 2 days, a fighter jet and a chopper. 9 service members killed. And now, questions about what caused the crashes. It's the bottom of the hour. Bottom of the hour headlines coming up next. Britain's top diplomat says it's overwhelmingly likely, in other words, it's true, that the Russian President Vladimir Putin personally ordered the poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter. They're both still critical in hospitals. World leaders, including President Trump, have blamed Russia for the March 4th attack, which happened in England. But now, the United Kingdom is pointing a finger directly at President Putin. Putin's spokesman called the accusation shocking and inexcusable, and that's a quote. The Kremlin continues to deny any involvement in this attack. There's word that Russia is preparing to kick out a handful of British diplomats as a result of it all. That's after the British Prime Minister Theresa May expelled 23 Russian diplomats earlier this week. She said Russia developed the type of nerve gas used in the attack. European Union diplomats are expected to talk about what next steps to take in a meeting that's coming up on Monday. And in a separate development, police in London say that they're now investigating a Russian businessman's death as murder after a pathologist determined that he died from compression to the neck. In other words, somebody strangled him. The victim is Nikolai Glushkov. Police found him dead inside his London home on Monday. At the same time, they said he died from an unexplained cause. That was in the beginning. Then there was an autopsy, and the counter-terror. Glushkov was a close friend of a well-known Putin critic who died under suspicious circumstances back in 2013. So there's a web here. Russia also announced it would investigate. Police say there's no evidence to suggest that this death is linked to the poisoning of a former Russian spy. Russian hackers attacked the United States energy grid, including nuclear power plants, but did not disrupt any operations. That's the word from the feds. The Trump administration also accusing Russia of targeting the U.S. water supply, factories, and air travel in an operation that started last year. The Fox Business Network, Deirdre Bolton is here. It is coming at us in all directions from these Russians.
It really is. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are essentially saying that, yeah, Russia has the power to hack into pretty much all the types of infrastructure that you just mentioned. I spoke with one of the directors at Symantec. This is a digital security firm, Eric Chin, and he said, yeah, they have what they need. His actual line was, their finger is on the switch. They can shut down whatever they want. And I said, okay, so then what's stopping him? And he said, well, yeah, they don't want an act of war. And then he said, I'm going to...
They already had one. The president's own people said this was cyber warfare.
Yes,
they didn't mince
cyber
words
warfare,
about it.
yes, and Rick Perry, of course, using that word as well. But I think as far as just universally shutting down a large system, we have not seen that yet at the hands of the Russians. But in the Ukraine in 2015, there was an experiment that proves essentially that Russia can do it. So, for example, there are about 260,000 people in Ukraine who were without power, without electrical power for days. And that was at the hand. Yeah, that was at the hand.
They shut it down. They sneaked their own people and they stuck their own people into the compounds and the military units. And then all of a sudden there were new people in charge and everybody was just quiet about it. They just took it over. And I guess the concern is that the Russians will continue to spread in that way, if you will?
So the concern is that, so in response, we have actually put in new sanctions as of today, and I think it remains to be seen. Also, the naming and shaming, right? This is the first time that our government has actually come out and said, okay, yes, since at least March 2016, we know that Russia has hundreds of thousands of times per day been trying to, whether it's through phishing or whether it's through malware, but affect our infrastructure. So calling and labeling, naming and shaming, as it's known, is seen as a deterrent. But there are a lot of diplomats who say, this is not really going to stop Russia if Russia is interested in doing something further.
The higher up the chain it goes, though, the more important the voice saying the words, the more effective this has been seen to be, according to diplomats in days past.
And I want to tell you one silver lining. Some of our infrastructure and its systems are so old, not digital, analog, and that's actually a good thing because the older the gear is, the harder it is to hack.
We need dial phones back, don't we?
There you go, dial phones.
Right. Remember those old phones?
Yes, yeah, hard to hack.
Our phone number was 252 when I was a child.
That's strong. That's a strong memory skill right there, Shep.
Old man. It's nice to see you.
Nice to
Have a great weekend. Sources tell Fox News that the Attorney General Jeff Sessions has until tomorrow to fire the former FBI director, or deputy director, I should say, Andrew McCabe, before his pension kicks in. McCabe has worked at the Bureau for 22 years. He's been a target of President Trump on Twitter, no doubt. He stepped down from his deputy director position in January, but remains on the payroll and is scheduled to retire this Sunday. Sources tell Fox News that the FBI officials are recommending that Jeff Sessions fire McCabe before then. If that happens, McCabe could lose his entire government pension, I'm told. It kicks in on Sunday, 1 minute after midnight. Let's turn to the chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, who's live in Washington. Catherine, what's behind this? What's the veil lift on this?
Well, the bottom line right now is that we understand deliberations on his fate are ongoing at the Justice Department, Chef, and a decision could come later today. But as you mentioned, it could also slide in tomorrow with that 12:01 Sunday deadline. We got some new video this morning out of suburban Virginia, and it shows McCabe leaving his home. He took that unusual step of yesterday going to Main Justice here in Washington to plead his case and to preserve his government pension. We are told the most likely outcome if he's fired is that his government pension will be reduced because the legal bar is so high to take the pension away altogether. The recommendation to terminate McCabe grew out of the independent review of the FBI and Justice Departments handling the Clinton email case by Justice Department Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz. Fox News is told that McCabe was not forthcoming with federal investigators and may have deliberately misled them or lied about his role in media leaks.
I think this IG report is going to be particularly impactful, more so than any of these useless congressional investigations. I think you're going to see some pure TNT come out in this IG report.
McCabe is not commenting publicly on the status of this decision by the DOJ, Shep.
Remind us, Andy, McCabe's history with the FBI.
Okay, McCabe was forced out in January after a conversation with the new FBI Director Christopher Wray, and it was about the Inspector General's findings about the Bureau's handling of the Clinton email case in 2015 and 2016. A source told Fox News that McCabe was offered a demotion, but he elected to go on what's called terminal leave and wait out his time until Sunday when he could retire with 20 years of service. McCabe has been in Republican crosshairs since 2016, when it was first revealed that his wife, Jill McCabe, received more than $700,000 from Democrats for a 2015 state Senate race that she eventually lost. While most of the money came from a longtime Clinton ally and his PAC, the FBI Ethics Board said there was no conflict. After FBI Director Comey was fired by President Trump last year, McCabe testified to Congress that he and the Bureau are above politics.
Has the dismissal of Mr. Comey in any way impeded, interrupted, stopped, or negatively impacted any of the work, any investigation, or any ongoing projects at the Federal Bureau of Investigations?
There has been no effort to impede our investigation to date. Quite simply put, sir, you cannot stop the men and women of the FBI from doing the right thing, protecting the American people, and upholding the Constitution.
If McCabe is ultimately fired, there's two big takeaways. Number one, I can't remember in 20 years someone that senior at the FBI being fired for cause by the internal body that reviews ethics complaints and misconduct allegations. And the second thing is it does give us a window into what the IG has found and the serious nature of those allegations and whether or not there would be a ripple effect in this case, Shep.
Catherine Herridge in Washington. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up, we will go back to South Florida, where we're learning more about the companies which built the bridge that collapsed on cars yesterday. One of those companies accused of hiring unskilled and careless workers. Those are quotes. What people at those firms are now saying about the deadly collapse. That's next on Fox News.